All right.
Mike
This
Sudyk in the building. Did I pronounce your last name
you
correctly?
did. You did,
Yeah,
man.
I
Because
did.
we're good friends. We're actually
Because we
friends.
know.
We're not
Yeah.
just strangers.
Hey man, it's great to get you here on the podcast. We've talked a lot about, fatherhood. You have a podcast, Tucson Dad, which you've had some ridiculous level of guests on, and also just some really cool insights. And we talk about homeschooling. You also homeschool, so a lot of interesting. And you also are like a recruiter. You work for a company that builds teams. So it's like there's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
But how do you introduce yourself?
Well, first of all, Ken, it's a pleasure to be on your show, man. And I love everything you're doing. I love your consistency of just quality output, man. You're like
Output, consistency of output, the quality
consistency of
piece.
output.
You gotta you gotta put a caveat on that word.
I didn't say that, but you could say that.
I can say that. I can say that. I can
um,
say that. That's kind of my bias, though, is I have a bit of a bias for putting stuff out. And I think that it is what it is. Like I have a buddy that focuses intensely on quality of his technical setup and, maybe is not as consistent on putting stuff out. So it's an interesting balance to find.
it's interesting. It made me think of, do you follow Matt D. Smith? He's a designer, MDS. He goes by the Twitter handle MDS. He's a guy out of Atlanta.
I don't think so.
He, so it's interesting.
I know a
This is
guy I know a guy with a Twitter handle Whale who I think his name is Matthew Smith.
I'm
But
gonna look him up right now
but his
because
Twitter handle is Whale.
I don't
And
think I don't think it's
I don't
MDS.
know.
But
Okay.
anyways, he did this video project where it was like him like in a like a dystopian future where it was like you're looking through the lens of like a computer where it's like analyzing his face and like things are popping up. And he did this. It was like a time lapse, but it probably took him like an hour or two. And it looked really cool. Like, and this guy's super talented. And he's like a known designer, but I'm like, why is he doing this? Like, this had to have taken so much time. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, so you need like content marketing, whatever. Maybe it's good for him to like put out. But it struck me, Kalen, that I was like, he got good by doing stuff like this. And like to speak to your like consistent output, it's like you just do that. Like he enjoys it, obviously. I think you
Yeah.
enjoy it too. I don't think it's torture for you, all the content you put out, but it's like, that's what he just does that and he just gets better. Like
Yeah.
that's just part of the process, And it was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it kind
Yeah.
of struck me have I rationalized away doing something that probably would have gotten me, better skills or whatever down the road of where I want to go
Yeah.
because I didn't think it was like high ROI or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think
it's like,
I
yeah,
think it is, we were talking a little bit about Gary Vee, and one of the things that Gary Vee talks about a lot is don't get blocked by wanting to have the perfect setup, the perfect camera. Just start putting stuff out. And he talks about that a lot. And then, of course, his quality has gotten up over the years quite a bit. But yeah, that's definitely, I sort of have a bias in that direction for better or worse. And then I'm
mhm,
also try to be conscious of improving quality as well. But putting out content is tricky. I think for me, really enjoying it is so much of the battle. And I've definitely have times when I get burned down on it. I stop doing it, and finding I think finding something you're genuinely interested in is sort of the whole game on some level. Like your podcast on fatherhood, I think is so cool on so many levels, and I think there's this real gap in the world right now for fathers in specifically,
yeah,
and particularly that intersection of people that are in business. And at the same time, like if you're putting on your growth hacker hat, like doing a dad podcast isn't going to make money necessarily, right? But you're
yeah.
doing it because you love it, because you care about it. And maybe there's a cool way to monetize that, right? Maybe you could sell beard like kits, or like who knows, right? Like that would be
For the guy that doesn't even have a beard, that's as cool as yours.
yeah. But like maybe there's a way to do that, and that would be great. Like that'd be awesome to be able to give yourself the space to, you know, 10x what you're doing there, but you just do it because you love it. And I love that about it.
there's a fine line. That's a good point you bring up. So I would say it's a fine line between authenticity and actually like work that you have to put into it. It's
Yeah.
like and it kind of opens up the discussion around like following your passion, is like that's like kind of BS advice, but there's some truth in it.
Yeah.
And just to put out content like blindly is not necessarily a good strategy either. There's like this careful like balance there.
Yeah.
And I started the Tucson Dad podcast, which you can find at Tucson Dad, the number 2 tucsondad.com.
There we
um,
go. There we go.
plug it a little bit. I started because I just wanted to have these conversations. I was starting to run a business that I'd taken over as a family business. We built software teams for companies, and I think we had our second at the time. So we had 2 kids that were under like 3, and I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And what I don't know how to do was I didn't know how to balance my time because I actually really cared about business and I wanted to spend time there. It
Yeah.
wasn't like I hated the man and it's like, oh, I hate my job, but I want to spend all my time with the kids. Like, no, I actually really like this. And I actually want to spend less time with my family here sometimes. And that's not a good thing. But then there's
Yeah.
sometimes
But
where
you,
I hate it and I want to spend time with my family. It's like, I don't know how to deal with this. And this is like a child, in the
yeah.
sense that you're like trying to build this thing. And I'm like, I didn't see anything out there for that. I didn't see anything. It was one of 2 categories. One was stay-at-home dads, which is like, okay, that's fine, but that's just not me. I
We
don't
could
relate to
rant.
that.
Me and you could rant on that for a while.
We can rant all
I
day,
think.
man. It's like, or the other one was, it was all business stuff. There was nothing. It's like, they kind of just like, you can't talk about business without talking about your personal life or if you have a family, about your family.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I couldn't find anything. I'm like, I just want this to exist in the world. And I was talking to my buddy Alan Branch. Actually, I don't know if you know him. He
Yeah. I've
runs.
talked to him once before. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
he was the guy that encouraged me to just start the podcast. And I was like, I was thinking about like a blog. I was like, I didn't really, well, podcast wasn't on my radar. He's like, dude, just call these people up and just have a conversation, hit record. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. He's like, just do it. He goes, go get 5 people. And he goes, well, I'll be
He
one of your
does so
5.
many cool things. He does
Does
so
so much
many,
cool stuff.
so many random. Like did you see his? Was it on YouTube? He did a full on. It was a TV show. It was produced by. Uh,
Brilliant. Brilliant. And I want to copy it. He basically had a
it's
film production
unreal.
company,
Yeah.
wanted to buy this house and rehab it. It was like a ware home, he called it.
Right.
And
Right. Right. Right.
he's
Right.
like,
Right. Right.
he's like, well, what if we turn this into a show? And then he started like, I don't even know. I think he like filmed it and everything. And then he took it to Lowe's. I think it was Lowe's. And
That's right.
basically it was like,
That's right.
he basically just set a show down on their desk and was like, hey, do you want to buy this? And he said it was so compelling to Lowe's. So I talked to him about this and he was like, it was so compelling to Lowe's because they didn't have to fart around with like the production company, all the
Right.
timeline. They're like, yeah,
It's
we'll
just
we'll
done.
pay you money. And then he got a whole bunch of free stuff. He's like, he would like, all these companies would just be like, hey, we're sending you a table saw. And I'm like, dude, you are like, I'm like so jealous of you right now. You have
Right.
no
Right.
idea.
Right. 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 Like
He's the
getting.
nicest guy. You can't
Yeah.
you can't not like Alan Branch.
You can't. It's impossible. It's physically impossible.
It's totally physically impossible. So he encouraged me to do it. And he's like, I'll be your guest, like one of your guests. So he was like the first episode, I think. And so it's interesting because then I would just call people. I didn't have an agenda. And I think that the authenticity that you're talking about
That's it.
before,
Yep.
it's like people realize that. And I think you think about like sales, you think about whatever. It's like, if you're trying to be something you're not, people's BS radars are like hyper tuned
Totally.
to.
And even if you're being totally upfront, you're saying, hey, listen, I'm a recruiter, have some great options for you. Those guys, Jason Calacanis, DHH, Jason Fried, those guys get pitched stuff all the time. What they don't get pitched is, hey, let's just talk about fatherhood.
Right.
And I think that's what makes it such a unique pitch because, like you said, there is this, let's call it 80% of dads or whatever the number is that have a job. They are dedicated to their work. They probably struggle quite a bit, if we're being honest, with, I don't want to spend time with my kids, right? It's easier for me to focus on work, and I need to focus on work, and I want to provide for my family. And I've spent so many hours doing that maybe I lost touch a little bit with, and I think almost like in the entire world, there's like, people are trying to become more balanced in that way. And it's a real struggle, you know, and I think that most dads are somewhere in that spectrum, and they're not the like 100% stay-at-home dad. They're, you know, and they're in this sort of messy middle, and I think that's why it really speaks to something, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously COVID kind of like threw all that for, I mean, threw everyone into that, working remotely more. And it made the middle, it blended everything together, right? There was less distinction.
Right.
If you didn't normally work from home, or maybe you did on occasion, not only now are you working from home full time, you really can't go to these places you probably would go to. Your kids are home all the time. It's like, it exasperates that, the boundaries maybe. Like, I found myself like, I just need to get out of here. I need to like I need to
Yeah.
go work somewhere else. And it's like, which is interesting because if you don't have that level of self-care, it can actually breed resentment, right? You're just like,
Totally.
that's not a good thing. And I don't I feel like I'm not saying I'm like really good at that, or like I don't, it's not like I have a lot of resentment or whatever, but I'm not good at self-care sometimes. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
good at being like, "Hey, I just need like an afternoon or something, or like a few hours to just go, even just go for a walk or something to get out of the house." It's like I'm not good at that. And then like it builds up and it's like kind of explodes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
I feel
Aaron, touch
like
my dirty laundry.
Yeah, no, but that's so important to a lot of people really can't be so transparent about these things. And I think that there's such a need for that because, like, all of us living in the real world are not perfect dads. And we wish, like, you always have some level of guilt of, I'm not doing it right. I hope I'm not messing up my kids. I hope I'm, you know, and those, you know, especially for those of us that care about our kids, and I think that's, again, is that 80% that really care, but you realize you're messing things up all the time. And I feel like I'm spending actually less time right now, I would say, with my kids than at some points in the past. But the difference is, when I am spending time with them, it's no phones, it's no distractions, it's I'm zoned in. So probably throughout the day, I have, you know, we have dinner, we have a couple hours in the evenings, and then a little bit interaction throughout the day, throughout work. I just had lunch, and I had, you know, like a half hour. They were showing me some of the stuff they did, and we were talking and stuff like that. And so there's been times where I probably had more physical time with them because maybe we're spending 3 hours together watching TV, or I'm on my phone on the couch. And so I kind of have a little bit less time in some ways, but it's so much more focused, and I feel so much better about it. And then we have a real good flow. Like on Saturdays, we always do something fun together, getting out into nature, that kind of thing, and stuff like that. And so yeah, I mean, sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean, because here's the thing: if I have to spend 24 hours with my kids trying to be somewhat sane and to pay some level of attention to them, it ain't gonna happen. Like, I'm not, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not super dad. Like, I'm not,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm working to improve that and to look for ways to get more time with them, more quality time with them, more projects together when we talk about homeschooling and things like that. But it's, you know, there are
But
limits, you know.
that's not necessarily the ideal either. I'm not saying that you're saying that, but it's like, it's not like we should be striving for 24/7, always interaction. I mean, they have to have boundaries too, right? Or not
Yeah,
boundaries, but like, there needs to be time between those interactions for them to have life apart. And obviously it's different stages of life, but it just speaks to the quality of that time and the
yeah,
engagement level, right?
yeah,
It's like, the extremes are easy, but in parenting. So like, either you can be super hover parent or you can be super absent parent. And the super hover parent thinks they're doing a good job, but you're actually smothering your child, right? And that's not good. So like, but it's easy to be an extreme. It's easy to like, it's hard to be somewhere in the middle, right?
yeah,
Like, and so it's like the classic case is like teachable moments for your kids, where it's like, it's easy just to either tie their shoe or just to tell them, tie your shoe, I'm getting in the van. You better tie your shoe and just come there. Right. Or if you're like, hey, let me teach you some techniques, and I'm not gonna tie it for you, but let me like stand at your shoulder and show you what you're maybe doing wrong. Like that might take like 10 minutes as opposed to like 30 seconds to tie their shoe. Maybe that's a crappy example, but it's like um all the work is somewhere in that spectrum in the middle, right?
Yeah. It's a perfect example. I mean, I'll be honest. Like I was talking to my buddy today or yesterday, and I had this moment where my youngest daughter or my middle daughter, she's 5, was she leaves the door open, the back door to the backyard, and we have tons of flies in the house all of a sudden this last week, and it drives me crazy. And I kind of got a little upset. I kind of raised my voice and tell her to hurry up and not leave the door open. And I was like, I caught myself and I was like, like that wasn't the greatest thing, to get frustrated. And yes, like you said, like it was quick. It was quick and easy to say, hey, close the door. But would have been better to take a little minute to say, hey, how can we get you to remember to close the door? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's like then you also have a moment there. I'm with you on this. This is yeah, I without trashing my kids, I could go on a whole rant about that. I gotta be careful what I get. But it's like you can either there's also like if you do react that way, which I find myself doing that multiple times, right? It's like you can then go in and say, "Hey, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that," and actually like apologize and show them how to do that.
Yeah.
Or you can be like, "Well, I'm not gonna do that. Like, I'm gonna cramp down, and I'm gonna just make sure that they remember to close the door." Or you just close the door for them, or something. It's like there's a middle ground there,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah. And it's
so
in the day to day, in the little moments when you're rushed. And then the other thing yesterday is like my wife was sick, so I was doing breakfast, I was doing changing the diaper, I was stepping up in some respects to help out more. But sometimes when you do that, when you push yourself, you just have a little bit less patience for things that come up. And so it's like I'd love to be that perfect dad that could do everything, take care of everybody, and also have perfect patience. But it's like in real life, there's you always second guess, how did I handle this interaction, that interaction, and so it's yeah, it's tricky when you have life getting in the way and stuff like that.
yeah,
Um, but so the whole homeschooling thing is real interesting right now because
yeah.
it's kind of exploding, right, due to COVID. And you've been in the game for longer than I have, I think. How long have you guys been homeschooling?
We've been doing it pretty much since the beginning, and I should say we, I mean, mostly my wife, which I'm sure you're in the same boat,
100,
does
yeah,
does the
100%.
share of the work, but, it's totally fascinating. I think, I think the silver lining for COVID is people waking up a little bit more to their being more engaged with their children in general,
Yeah,
and also questioning kind of the education process and the kind of just the normal path, which is like public education. They're just questioning that, and I don't mean to say that that's all bad and there's no redeeming value in public education. Listen, I was homeschooled first through fourth grade, then went to public school, had a great experience, right? Um, but it's interesting to me, Kaylin, how it's almost like the remote work thing. Like if you normally worked in the office and then you're all of a sudden now working from home and you didn't have any sort of systems for doing actually remote work, you're not really doing good remote work, right? You're just doing work from home. It's the same thing as like if your kids were all suddenly having to like do remote schooling for public schooling, like that's not really homeschooling. Um, but um, but it's
yeah,
it's it's cool to
it's like
like
everybody's getting a crash course in. And there's such a learning curve. Like I don't know about you guys, but like we've been doing it now for 5, 6 years, and it was super hard in the beginning, the first year or two. I mean, there's a lot of learning, figuring out your curriculum, figuring out, am I crazy? Is this totally nuts? Especially because my wife and I,
yeah.
yeah, am I, yeah, 100%. Am I ruining my kids and stuff like that? So like all of that learning curve, like nope, like people doing it now, it's so accelerated. and they're not even choosing to do it. It's just like, I'll do this because I have to, but the second I don't have to do this, I'm done, so it's a
And
very different.
in its essence, the way that we kind of think about homeschooling, and I think you probably do too, it, that is, it doesn't matter actually where your kids go to, quote school. It's an ownership of your child's education
Right,
that you're not just abdicating to someone else.
right,
And so that you can do that if your kid attends a public school or a private school, or you
right.
do, homeschooling. But it kind of it changes your thinking on like, I'm responsible for my child's education. And so I'm gonna choose the best maybe main education route, but I'm gonna seize any sort of teachable moment. I'm gonna give them experiences such that it's gonna round out their, worldview and all of this stuff. And it's like, and maybe you say, hey, I assess that I'm probably not able-bodied enough to do traditional homeschooling. So I'm gonna seek out these alternative methods. I'm gonna send them to public school, but I'm gonna do these things to supplement that or whatever.
Yeah,
That's fine.
yeah,
I think that's the exciting thing that I kind of see with COVID. It's like it's people's like eyes opening up where it's like the traditional path is like, yeah, once the kid hits like 5, 6 years old, they're going to like preschool, K, kindergarten and on up. It's like that's just you just ship your kid off to school and you see them after work, and that's just how it
yeah,
works. And it's like
yeah,
that's just totally abdicating the role where it's
yeah,
like people are like, first there was chaos because you had to do things from home, and then you're like, wait a second, like maybe they shouldn't just do worksheets all day and when they're in first grade, and the metric shouldn't just be that they got 30 worksheets done today. Like maybe that's
right,
not the best.
right.
Wait,
Uh,
what they've been doing at public school? Okay, well, what should they be doing? So then it's like people are like Googling, okay, what should they be doing, or what are some of their activities, or they're just like taking them to the store. I mean, I guess maybe not COVID, they're not taking them to the store, but it's like you're just doing life with them and you're using that to like teach them, and it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
that's really cool.
Yeah. And I think there was probably a time in the US and in other countries that made that time maybe now where the educational system was so strong and the alignment of values was so evenly distributed. Everybody was sort of on the same page where you really kind of could do that. You could just send them to school, outsource that, not worry about it. And there's something very simple and nice about not having to worry about that. But just due to the age we live in, it's just not the case. No matter, like you said, no matter what situation you're in, public, private, homeschool, whatever, you have to take an active role in it's really, it's, I mean, education is a subset of parenting, right? And a lot of times there's this mindset of like, well, you're the parent, we're the teacher. Don't step on our toes. And to have that shift in thinking, I think, like you're saying, is huge. It's the biggest shift by far that you can have in the context of education, your kids' education, and
Why do you think you're saying the values you think shifted, or what changed, besides just having rose-colored glasses for what was, right, in the past? Now that we're, like, getting to being old guys here, but it's like, what what shifted? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. I have some thoughts on that, but I wanna hear.
yeah, I mean, I try to stay out of things that are political adjacent. You can get
You wanna
yourself in
get
a.
canceled. We can't get the podcast canceled here.
Yeah, yeah, but
You can edit out whatever you want, Kalen, so I just
yeah,
you edit it out, man.
yeah, I don't really do any editing, so, but, but, yeah, I mean, if you are, a little bit more conservative leaning, there's a lot of things that are not going to be real super aligned with your thinking. Kind of leave it at that. Um, and even just, outside of that, is just I'll give you an example. Like, I went to public school. It was mostly fine. But there was, I mean, like, I was, like when I started going to high school, I had a group of friends and they had some friends, and it was like a hazing thing. Like, all my friends are like Korean. And so their older friends were like, we're going to beat you guys up. So they were going to beat us up. And I was like terrified about that. Then I got into a couple fights in high school. There was a shooting, when I was in junior grade or whatever. My wife's high school was about 10 times worse than mine, with gang activity and things like
Mm,
that. And so, some people say, well, it's socialized. That's life. You want your kids to understand the real world, right? And like, on the one hand, I do want my kids to go through challenges, right? If they have this perfect life and they've never had anybody be mean to them before, that's part of life. You got to learn how to deal with that. But that doesn't mean that every negative situation, just because it's public school, is automatically healthy socialization, right? There can be environments that, I saw somebody use the phrase psychologically abusive. I mean,
mm,
there can be environments that are psychologically abusive or physically abusive, and just because it's public school, it's socialization, doesn't mean that it's okay. Like, you want your kids to have challenges. You want them to learn to socialize. And like, when you homeschool, you have to sort of figure that out yourself. You have to figure out what things are we going to get them into. Our kids are in dance, they're in music, they're in all sorts of stuff. But you have to kind of create that yourself. It's almost like, with this whole kind of creator economy, like, many people are becoming creators of content or making a product or selling something. And it's like, as a parent, you have to create the environment that your kids, it's like a choose your own adventure.
yeah.
It's like, there isn't just this one path that works for everybody. It's like, you got to kind of create all that. And then, of course, the challenge is, am I micromanaging too much? Am I being too controlling? Are we, so, it's a tricky, and everybody has their own philosophy on it. I have daughters. I'm super overprotective, I mean, the idea of anybody doing anything that would hurt my daughters is, I'd go berserk.
I'm with you on that, man. Amen. I would
Yeah.
be, yeah, I would.
We'd have some
I
problems
would,
if somebody
yeah,
did
we'd have some,
something.
we'd have,
we'd
that's, yeah, we'll
have,
just leave that. We have some problems. We have some problems.
we'd have some problems,
Oh.
But what are your thoughts on that?
I like what you said about like you're the creator trend and you're actually creating the education experience for your kids, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Um, you hit on a lot though, so I'm trying to figure out what to respond to. um, the whole socialization is a misnomer. It's with homeschooling. It's like people obviously have when someone says that they actually have no idea. Like that's so they have no idea when you're like, oh,
Yeah.
how are they going to socialize? It's like, okay, we're not Amish, but that's cool.
And
Anyways,
by the
so I'm just like,
way,
I don't even want to talk to someone like that.
I think the Amish might be the one group of people that have it figured out. You know what I mean? Like,
There's some truth there. Yeah, I'll give you that. I'll give you
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Um, so there's the socialization piece, and it's kind of like, okay, so you're just saying your socialization is just throwing your kid into like a group of unknown people that are just going to shape them and mold them. That sounds like a good idea. Yeah, good luck with that. Um, But socialization, actually, when you think about that, it's kind of like then you have to ask the question, what is society and does it match my values? And that's what you were saying. I think earlier you're saying if you're more concerned, then you have to look at what is the environment like that public schools are shaping. And that's a whole nother discussion. I don't actually have a lot of intel on that because my kids are homeschooled, so I don't know what the current state of that is. I know that when I went to school, I'm 34. So when I was in high school, it was like it wasn't that way. There wasn't some of the stuff that's going on now. But the interesting thing that you were bringing up about creating your own education, and then you said how overbearing do you be or how involved, and that ties right in with like the challenges. And I think something I'm thinking about right now is like my oldest is 9, and I think that's similar. How your oldest is?
She'll be 11 in
Should be 11. Okay,
about a week. Yeah.
so pretty close. And so as they get kind of like to that age, this is my thought, I'm not an expert, but it's like you want them to struggle with some things. You want them to start to have to go through sorts of like rites of passage, right? And my oldest is a boy, so I think there's a little bit more tendency to like, hey, I want him to like, toughen up a little bit, right? But it's like,
100%. It's so
but that's
different.
hard. That's hard. And there's things that are built into the traditional schooling system, like sports, like some level of hazing. That's actually okay. Like, it's kind of like it kind of toughens you up a little bit. So it's like you don't want to fully eliminate that. And it's
Like
like,
I kind of want I got into fights when I was a kid. I kind of want my son to go through that on some level. You know what I mean? To have
how
that.
much you know about yourself? You've never been in a fight. I don't want to die without any scars. You know,
Exactly.
is that
Yeah.
what a man looks like? Calvin
Yeah.
Klein or what? I was trying to quote some Fight Club, but that didn't
Yeah,
work that well.
exactly. Yeah, it sounded like a quote. Yeah, exactly. But I hear what you're saying, you know? It's like you
Yeah.
want them to go through some challenges.
So I don't have a good answer for that. But I think what I see and I observe in society is that there's a tendency to soften things up, right? It's like you don't want anyone to be offended. You don't want anyone to feel a microaggression, whatever the heck that is. I don't know. It's like you don't want any sort of pain or anyone to feel ostracized or excluded. Are there extremes of that? Yes. Are there things like racism? Yes. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying like I think if you go overboard with that, you have to just be cognizant of what baby is being thrown out with that bathwater, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And it it's just interesting. I don't know what that is. And so like, okay, sports, you can kind of recreate that with homeschooling. You can do some other things, but I'm just trying to be cognizant of that because I think it's a really important developmental aspect of growing up. And the key thing is like, how do you respond when people that don't like you do things to you? Like how's your character get built around that? And
Yeah.
then how do you respond when something you pour your hard work and your soul and your sweat into and it doesn't work out? Like how are you going to respond? Those are
Right.
essential life skills you have to learn to be successful. And it's like, how do you manufacture that? Almost not manufacture,
Yeah.
but like, how do you put your kids in situations like that? Like,
Yeah. And we had, I think about a scenario we had back a while back where I would take my daughter to the park a lot. She's like the most social person, and that's one of the things that's like you said, you worry a little bit. Am I screwing up my kid? But I see how social she is in every different scenario. So we go to the park a lot. She'd meet people, and there were situations where there was people who I thought there was a good relationship there, but then things would start to happen, and there was it's kid stuff. It's going to the park and her not wanting to play with her, right? Which sounds very childish. It is childish. But
mhm.
there was a period of months where I would take my daughter home crying, almost every time we went to the park because of this one particular thing. And that's it's sort of a silly thing on one level, but there was some real relational pain and relational struggle there, and rejection, dealing with rejection and stuff like that. And we had to kind of talk her through it and stuff. And so it was a scenario where on a micro scale at a young age where there was some real relational struggle she was working through, but we were working with her through that somewhat closely and talking through that. And she was, I don't know, 6 or something like that. And my wife, continues to talk with her a lot about everything that she goes through. But I think that's sort of a little bit of my mental model for it, is that things are going to come up, and you just hopefully you're close to your kids, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like there's the whole hover thing, right? Anytime you're spending too much time with your kids, it can be called you're hovering, your helicopter. But I think that on another level, we want to be close to our kids. And I don't think that
Yeah.
I don't know if that's necessarily common in our society to be close, to have a close relationship, to have a close dialogue, to really have a lot of a high level of trust and communication. I think for me, that's the goal, you know?
I would agree with that, but I would disagree on some level to say you also don't want to just be their friend. Like you want to be their friend, but you still have to be their parent, you know?
Right.
And I think that's what I think what I heard you say though is it sounds like you took a good path. You took the middle road, right? You didn't take an extreme. So one extreme could be like you don't go back to that park anymore, and you remove her from that adversity. That could be one extreme. Or one extreme could be like you just got to get over it, whatever your daughter's name is, like you just got to get over it, and then you don't say anything. You don't help her process it, right? And
Yeah.
it's like so it's kind of like you got to put in the work to like talk her through it and be like, this is, I mean, I don't know what you said, but it's kind of like these challenges are going to come in life. Like there's some people that are just mean, and
Yeah.
like this is going to happen and I'm sure it's like, you can like help her sort that out. Cause it's like, she's like, why is this person meaning me? Like, am I a bad person or, like, did I do something wrong or am I less than valuable or something? I mean, I don't know. She can have all these thoughts and she can process them in a vacuum, or you can help her process them, and help her mature.
Yeah.
So it's like, again, it's that middle road. It's like, you got to put in the work,
Yeah.
but it's not easy. Like that's the
Yeah.
thing. It's like, and as a dad, you're like, dude, I don't know what to say. I never had the 6-year-old get bullied before. I don't remember when I was 6. I
Yeah.
don't know. Like it's kind
Yeah.
of like,
And then you're kind of
it's foreign territory.
you're kind of analyzing the situation and you're trying to figure out, is this just a regular disagreement argument, or is this a scenario where this person doesn't have the best intention for my daughter or doesn't really care about my daughter?
Mm,
You know what I mean? And you're trying to, and you don't know for sure. And as they get older, you have less and less. I'm not at the part, you have less and less direct contact in some ways and stuff. And
yeah.
so you got to read between the lines and try to figure out like at the end of the day, like healthy relationships will have challenges and
Mm,
you got to work
yeah.
through those challenges, right? But is it a healthy relationship or an unhealthy? If it's an unhealthy relationship, you want to encourage them to probably get out of it, right? If
Yeah.
it's a healthy relationship with challenges, you want to encourage them to work through it. And so I think those are the things that are hard to know, for sure.
And to realize what you said, healthy relationships have challenges. That's actually something I had to learn in my marriage. And I'm going to take us on a little tangent here. So my parents, I grew up in a great home. My parents are awesome. But one thing they didn't do is they didn't resolve conflict in front of us. So my parents, it's not like they fought all the time, but if they got into a disagreement, we might see one of them raise their voice and maybe they'd get into something, but they would resolve the conflict, apart from the kids. And maybe that was by nature of like, they'd be like, go play downstairs, like we're arguing or something. Or maybe they resolved it in the bedroom and I didn't want to see that anyways. But like, um, but like it's interesting that had an effect on me because by nature, I'm a positive conflict avoidance person by my personality. And so I wouldn't want to like have conflict in our marriage. So you'd kind of avoid it. So, because you'd be like, oh, conflict is a sign that our marriage isn't doing well. So this is like in the first like, year or two of our marriage was like, I kind of had to learn how to fight and learn how to resolve things. And so it's interesting when you talk about like with kids, it's like there's more caught than taught is the term, right? It's like so it's like there's one aspect of what you describe with your daughter where it's like you actively are involved in like talking her through that. But there's a whole nother dynamic where she's watching you and your wife,
Totally.
like she's
Totally.
seeing how you guys treat each other, right?
Yeah.
Okay, if mom is treating dad poorly and the dad doesn't say anything, or I never see her apologize and I never see her say, I was really stressed and like I'm really sorry, and then you to be like, I forgive you or whatever, like that speaks volumes, right? Like,
Totally.
and so it's just interesting to think about. And we're not perfect, right? Like, listen, my wife and I have fought in front of our kids multiple times, and it's like, and I'm not perfect at all. But it's like being aware of that is I think one of the most important things to be like, really, and that goes like a hierarchy of like where you should prioritize. Like you should work on your marriage because that and loving your wife because that's going to flow into everything. That's
Totally. Yeah.
it it displays, so many lessons to your kids.
Yeah, it really does. And I think that that's something I've been thinking about a lot the last several months in particular. And I think that we can be quick to kind of downplay that. Like if we are having some conflict it's kind of like, well, as long as we don't yell at each other in front of the kids, as long as we don't, but kids see everything. And
Yeah.
they feel all of that tension. So if you're not affectionate, loving, having fun, enjoying each other, um, anything short of that, even if you're not fighting, but anything short of that is having downstream effects on your kids, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm
It
really
it comes full circle to what we're talking about content marketing, being authentic, but then being diligent and doing the work. It's like
yeah,
you need to be
totally.
authentic in front of your kids. Like I need to show as much passion and love for my wife in when I'm feeling positive about her, and as much as I do when I'm feeling negative, right? If I'm getting like real mad and I'm raising my voice, I better be doing the same thing when I'm like actively trying to like resolve the conflict and make up and like, apologize. But I better do the work, because if I don't do the work of like doing that aspect of it,
Yeah.
then it's not going to be good. Then I'm just flying off the handle every time. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but you have to be authentic in that, cause you're right. You're so right. Like
Yeah.
your kids, they pick up on everything, man. Like, and your tone is going to change to them. If you're mad, if you're fighting with your wife or whatever, and if you're stressed out at work or whatever, like they know that.
They do. They do. And then they need to, in an ideal world, you would work all your stuff out in the other room, in the bedroom, somewhere else, and then you'd be perfect in front of your kids and your but in the real world, there are going to be days where you're in a bad mood, where you're having some level of conflict, and they're going to see how you work it out, how you deal with it, how you kind
Yeah.
of negotiate situations with your spouse. And it's not always going to be pretty. It's not always going to be perfect. But they're gonna learn from that, And I just think, man, I hope I'm setting a good example, for them, because they're gonna have all the same stuff. Like everybody it's this circle of life. Like they're going to be parents one day, they're going to have those annoying situations, they're going to have, they're going
Yeah.
to feel guilty that maybe they're messing up their kids,
Yeah.
and all that stuff cycles and repeats.
And it's interesting, like I was just thinking, like, it's a weird balance between focusing on your kids and not focusing on your kids when you talk about like modeling things. So if your kids are the center of your life, that's not a healthy thing, because then they have a focus always on themselves, right? And I was thinking about like when it comes to like physical fitness, like I've been trying to incorporate my kids in like my workout routine. I think the hashtag kid iron we were using, you and I were posting some videos,
Dude, you had a
and it's
bunch
like,
of views on that video, man.
yeah, it kind of took off. I tagged a guy called Zach Homo in Indy. He runs a gym over there. But so I'm just riding on the coattails of like really Twitter famous people. But it it's like I'll just be like, hey, I want to go for a run, and I'll just go. I'll say, hey, we're going for a run, and my youngest two, I'm pushing in a jogging stroller. The older two are riding their bikes, and it's just like this isn't me saying let's chat the whole way, and I'm this great dad, and I'm gonna be like catering to my kids. It's like, no, I make a commitment to myself. I want to be more physically fit. I'm involving the kids. It wasn't really even an option. I'm like, we're going for a run, and sometimes my oldest like, I don't want to go for a run. I'm like, no, we're going. It's gonna take 20 minutes, and you can ride your bike. Come on, it's like.
Yeah.
But he's seeing that as a priority, right? It's like, hey, I'm focused on fitness, and we're going to be focused on fitness as a family, right? Like, but it's just modeling it. It's like, this isn't about him. This isn't about, we're not going to go on the road that he wants to go on. We're not going to go to they want to go to the park sometimes, and we go to the park sometimes, but it's like, no, we're just going on a run. We're doing this. And it's like, I think in the same way with marriage, one of the things that's interesting is like, if you're just, people say, don't try to work on your marriage, like work on yourself, or like from a spiritual perspective, it's like work on your
That's my
faith, right?
whole mantra right
It's
now,
like
man. That's my whole
it,
thing right now.
yeah, it's crazy. And it's like, well, maybe there's something there as it relates to kids, right? It's like, if you're focused on your kid, I just thought of this when you were talking. It was like, if you're focused on your kids all the time, that's actually can be a negative, because you're like hyper hovering, and you're like assessing everything, and you're like,
Anxious about everything.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're anxious, and like, it's like To whereas if like one step above your kids is like your wife, and you're like, well, I'm going to focus on loving my wife. And I know that there's going to be a lot of downstream effects from that. And I'm going to focus on like health, and I'm going to focus on, serving people in the community maybe, or your faith, you'd say we want to pray or read the Bible more or something. It's like, that's going to have all these downstream effects. They're going to see that I'm interested in these things. I'm passionate about these things, and they're going to learn. And then they're going to be naturally inquisitive. Right. Like
Yeah.
that's the other thing, like when it comes to education, to loop that in, is like kids are so naturally curious. Like
Yes.
you just gotta, you surround them with resources and like just fuel their fire. Like,
Yeah.
but if you're not curious and you're not learning, guess
Yeah.
what? They're probably not going to care about learning either. If you
Yeah.
just watch TV all day, or just like don't do anything,
if you're just
don't expect
like,
your kids.
if you're just miserable and stressed out, and then you see your kids and you're like, do your homework and that's not going to be inspiring for them. I mean, my daughter has been drawing a lot. She's always loved to draw, and she's started to do it on her iPad. And I noticed, I was like, dude, she's drawing every single day in her like free time. And for a long time, I just like, oh, that's adorable. That's really cute. That's so cute. And you know how it is as a parent. Like sometimes the drawings they're beautiful to you because you're the dad, but they're not.
Yeah.
But I was like, dude, her drawings are getting better and better and better. And then at one point I was like, dude, maybe she is going to become an illustrator or something like that. And I'm always thinking of, it's an interesting tension, because my wife is very into like a classical homeschooling model, reading the classics, penmanship, writing, reading, like non-technology. And I'm very much technology and stuff. So I'm always thinking, man, could she become an illustrator? Like, how can I started teaching her to type. She's up to like 16 words a minute and stuff like that. And I'm always wanting to push in that direction. And we have this natural tension, which I think is good, because I don't want her to just be purely technology. And we don't let her use a phone. We're planning not to let her use social media for a long time. But trying to find that balance, and trying to, because like, for example, I'm a programmer. I would love for her to want to be a programmer. And I had tried to get her into programming, and there's some really cool materials for kids to learn to program visually and stuff like that. But it didn't take off. It wasn't there. And then now I'm seeing this illustration thing. I'm like, man, this is great. So then I'm kind of encouraging that. I want to get her a nice Apple Pencil and, some of the things that will help her down that path. But yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that like seeing the talents, seeing the curiosities, and then trying to, maybe push them a little bit in the direction they're already going in, is such a big part of it.
Yeah. And in order to do that, you have to be very like observant of what they're interested in. What's catching on? And then you feed that fire, throw a little kindling on it, like to get it going up. And it's like, okay, I want to equip her, and I'm going to invest in this, and we're going to get her, an Apple Pencil or whatever. And whatever that is, you're just stoking that natural fire that's there. And it's interesting. You say like my wife and I are the same. Like she's more classical. I'm more like, yeah, it's technology. And I want my son to like learn how to code, and he's kind of like interested in it. But it's like, there is something to be said for that's the world they're going to grow up in, right? Like you can't, you have to be able to, talk about socialization or whatever, but it's like, you also have to know how to use the tools that exist. Right. And you got to be aware of them at least enough to use them to accomplish what you want to accomplish. Right.
Yeah. One of the huge things I think about a lot is I want to teach my kids, like, when you look at social media, there's obviously a lot of negatives, especially you think about teenagers just being absorbed in TikTok or whatever. And there's a lot of negatives, but I think that there's a lot of real positives to knowing how to effectively build relationships online. Like I saw the phrase digital relationship building. And I was like, wow, that's something that I do a lot of, and I didn't have a word for it.
That's why we're talking. That's why we're talking.
That's why we're talking
on Twitter, man.
Yeah. That's something that you do an amazing job of, and you've built relationships with some of the real high level people in tech and on your podcast. And I'm sure you're also really good at sales. I think sales is a real interesting job as well. And so I think a lot about that. Like I wanna, like obviously it's great to have local relationships to be involved in whatever activities you're involved in, but I think the skill of building relationships is so important, and it's something that I want to teach them how to do. But it's like, especially at this age, I'm not going to just be like, okay, here's Twitter, have fun, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of garbage on the
Yeah.
internet, you know. So finding that balance is going to be a little tricky. But you know, that's
Yeah,
something I want
you
to.
don't give like you wouldn't give your daughter like a machine gun, right? You might say,
Right.
well, I give her a BB gun, or like, and I'll watch her use it for a little while so she doesn't like shoot her sister's eye out or something. But
Yeah.
it's like it could still be a tool if you need to learn how to like hunt or something. It's like, or a
Yeah.
knife or
Yeah.
something. It's like, you
Yeah.
don't just hand them a knife. You teach them how to use it. You teach them how to handle it. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's like the internet is uh, such a double-edged sword. It's such a powerful tool, but it's also it's a tool that can be used for positive or negative, right? There's all these studies on increases in depression among kids, and I think specifically girls. Because of all of the comparison, all of that
Yeah.
stuff, right? And it's like that stuff is real. Like that's not
Yeah.
a small thing. You know,
And
that's a
that's us
major
too,
thing.
Kaylin. Don't
And
just
that's
say it's just not girls. I mean, it's like I see what you're doing. I'm like, oh, Kaylin's got he's got the sweet podcast set up. Like, wow, his mic looks cooler than mine. I mean, like it's a reality. You can use that though, and you can be like, okay, am I getting caught up in that? Or am I saying, how do I, if I really have an objective to like increase the quality of my audio, I'll look at what people are doing and I'll mimic that. But I won't
yeah,
get down that road of I'm going to be like, oh, I just want to be like them or
100%.
whatever. So it's like
Yeah,
huge.
and it 100% affects us as I'm 39. You know,
Yeah.
almost 40-year olds. 100% affects us, and so we had a whole life that we grew up without all of this technology. So how much
Yeah.
more so does it affect somebody who's 14, doesn't know anything else, the brain isn't even fully developed, right? It's going to be so much more intense. But you're right, at the end of the day, we have to figure out how to grapple with those with the pros of being able to be inspired by somebody and to want to improve yourself, and the cons of sometimes just being filled with jealousy and anxiety and things like that, to where it's not helping you. And you have to sort of, you have to know
Yeah.
yourself, and you have to be able to, you know, like there's situations where there's somebody who I'm constantly, you know, feeling jealous of or whatever, and it just, it doesn't help me. It doesn't help me at all. So it's not something, whereas like I always tell you how impressed I am about your podcast guests, and like that to me is like an iron sharpening iron. Like it's inspiring to me. And so I
Hmm.
think that you got to know yourself. You got to know which things inspire you and which things don't, for whatever reason, and just,
Yeah.
you know, kind of curate the stuff that you're following. You got to curate your feed,
Yeah.
um, you know, to make it work
No.
for you at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you know?
And I'm learning that. I definitely have not learned that. I would say I get sucked into that trap often. And I think it's interesting because I feel like you and I are of kind of the generation where we grew up as this stuff was kind of coming out. It was like just after, like I didn't have Facebook in high school or really even like college, right? It was like
Right.
after that, but you're young enough where you kind of adopted it because you're like a early tech adopter, right? So it's like
Right.
we kind of saw that and then we could kind of like figure it out. And now stuff is coming out of the negative effects of it to whereas like kids that grew up maybe just after us, it's like they didn't know all the negative effects, right? And they're just growing up with all of this technology. And it's like, okay, now that we kind of understand it, it's our we need to write the training manual or the user's manual for some of this stuff, you
Right.
know, of how to avoid the pitfalls. And it's interesting. It all goes back to balance, and maybe that's too cliche, but it's like it's always in the middle. Like, so the guy that I look up to that I get envious of is a guy by the name of Nathan Barry, which I know you know who he is. He's a
Oh
founder of
yeah.
ConvertKit. He was on the podcast. I'll plug that to toot my own horn. But he wrote a blog post. I don't even remember. I don't know if I even read the whole thing. It was basically talking about how gratitude is like a bunch of BS and like it breeds complacency. And I thought it was the most like, I thought it was just like
That's
a
a
very
controversial
like,
take.
well, it's a
Counterintuitive.
controversial take, but it was kind of like, I didn't agree with it. Right. Like, but I didn't, but if you think about that and I'm like, he's kind of right to some degree, right? Like if you always concentrate on gratitude, like then you can kind of fall into complacency because you're just like, oh, my life is so great. And then you don't like aspire to greatness. And, but it's interesting because it's like he also hearing about some of the things that he dealt with, like some anxiety and some different things like that as he was growing Convert Kid and some of the toll that took. And like we talked about earlier, I think about a guy by the name of Sean McCabe, who Sean West, at Sean West, I think is his Twitter handle. He took a sabbatical year because he got like burned out. And he was a guy that I looked up to. He's like putting out a ton of content. It was like amazing. And he just did really good work. And it's like, I was inspired / envious of him. And it's a fine line between being just envious or dismissing them for being like, oh yeah, that's great, but he has a crappy family life. Like, so that, yeah, I could do that, but that's what the cost. So it's like, whatever, you just poo it away. To whereas like, if you take the middle road and say, how can I be inspired by this person or what can I learn from them and be aware of, okay, what are all the pros and cons here of what this person's doing? And how do I make myself better as a result? It's like,
Yeah.
we're talking about Gary Vaynerchuk. He's a classic example. Dude says family first, and then he works like 24/7. And it's like, when are you spending time with your family, man? Like, dude, you're obviously a horrible dad. And like, maybe I'm saying that to justify the fact that I'm not hustling as much as he is, but like, something's not adding up here,
Yeah. I remember I remember listening to Gary Vee back maybe 10 years ago, and there was a time and I think he's evolved on this topic quite a bit, and he had said something like, he was like, yeah, I'm going to let my kids use a phone from whenever they're young and whatever, that's the world that they're in. And it was just like it was like a very like capitalistic approach sort of to kids. And I had to stop listening. I was like, this is too much for me. And I've gone in and out of phases. And then more recently, as I've listened to his stuff, I really love a lot of his approach. And I think he's balanced out over time. And he talks about how he'll take these 6-week vacations that are totally unplugged, just family and things like that. And then when he's working, but on the weekends he's taking off and finding his own balance. I think finding his own balance within a context of being driven at a level that we probably don't understand what's going on in his brain of how driven he is, and finding that balance I think can be tricky. But it's interesting because I find that there can be people who, particularly if I feel like we are at the same level or we're close to the same level, and then all of a sudden they're up here, I have a hard time drawing inspiration. It's easier for me to feel jealous versus if they're already up here, it's just like, oh yeah, they're just up here. That's awesome. I want to be like them. So I've had those situations where it constantly aggravates me, and then I just have to see less of it in my feed because it's just I'm an issue, I just
you just jump to an extreme. You're like, I'm just gonna get rid of it.
Yeah.
Sorry,
And
I don't
then
mean that.
and sometimes
you're preaching to the choir on this, Caleb.
No, and you're right. I do a lot. I do the extreme thing a lot, and it's part of my nature. It's one of the things that I need to work on. But yeah, the Nathan Barry thing is real funny because I had an email software that I was at the same revenue level as him. You remember when he was at the 5,000 a month?
Yeah, it was like an experiment, right? He was trying to do like an app challenge or something.
Something like that. But in his post where he talks about how he was kind of I think it was at like 5,000 a month. I don't know if you've read this post, but somebody challenged, I think it was Heaton Shaw challenged him and said, hey, you got to go all the way on this. And then he decided to go all the way on this. and then his revenue is, I think it's 2 million. I think it's what is it? It's
It's
something
2 million a month. It's 2 million
It's
MRR,
two
I
million a
think.
month. It's 2 million a month. So think about this, man. We were both at 5,000 at the same time, and mine had some modest growth to that point. I mean, very, very, very modest. But his is just, it's absurd, like the way it's grown. And so that was one of those things where it was like, oh, well, I thought we were sort of on the same level. No, you were not. We're not. You're not on his level, dude. You're not. And yeah, I think he just seems like an amazing guy, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and
That's I would say you're preaching to the choir on that. Like I can relate to you 1 million%. I never even actually had an app that was that successful. So you beat me on that, Caleb. But it's like that is a breeding grounds for resentment and robbing your life of what you're actually doing. Right. So it's like you can then constantly like be mad at yourself that you didn't go all in on that, and then you can start to resent like and maybe you didn't in that time frame. You had really good quality time with your kids, you did all these other things that you're not even thinking about, right? You're only thinking about how you didn't do that one thing, right? And then you can start to resent your family, be like, oh man, I kind of sacrificed my business on the altar of my family. I'm one to say you shouldn't sacrifice your family on your altar of success, but maybe I've sacrificed my success on the altar of my family. And that sounds bad to say that because it's like, how could you say that? But it's like, you can feel that,
you can
right?
feel
You
that.
can
You can
feel
feel
that.
that.
And you can resent your family. And like, no one's ever gonna be like, nah, I don't really resent my family. But you actually do
You
sometimes. I
totally
do,
do. You
and
totally can. You totally
then maybe
can.
that makes me a jerk dad. I don't know. But it's like, you can totally do that. So it's like,
Everybody thinks
but you
these
don't go,
things. Very few people say them and articulate them. You know?
you can, but you can, then it goes back to the extremes, and I'll harp on this on broken freaking record, but it's like, you can go to the extreme of like, if you find out he struggled with anxiety and he struggled with overwhelm and maybe depression or something as he was growing his business. Yep. Told you so. Yep. That idiot. Yeah, that's why I didn't build that business. Yeah. See, he sucks. I bet his family sucks too. I bet you he's actually a crappy dad, you jump to the cynical, like negative side, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, I'm sure you haven't done any of this, right? But it's
Never.
like, that's an extreme. Instead, you can say, okay, I consciously made these decisions, and maybe they weren't in line with what I wanted to do, but it's neither here nor there. I have to concentrate on, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, and how am I going to adjust? And I think one thing I'm struggling with, and I would assume there's a lot of dads in this boat, is like, this is something I'm like going through like right now, just to be fully candid. It's like kind of this weird, like midlife crisis, like scenario, but it's not a midlife crisis. It's kind of like, you're like, okay, I feel like both of us are probably the same level in terms of like engagement with our kids, right? Like we didn't sacrifice time with our kids to grow this career, this crazy career. So it's not like you're going through a midlife crisis where you put in all these hours and then all of a sudden your kids are grown and you're like, oh, I just want to like buy a sports car or something. But it's kind of like, I put in all this time and I didn't give that enough credit for all the things I did do. And maybe I sacrificed doing these other like business endeavors or hobbies or whatever. Instead, I poured into my kids. But you're not thinking about that. You're just thinking about all the things you didn't do. And then you're realizing, you're like, my values kind of changed in the process. I don't want to run a unicorn, or I don't want to grow this massive business, but I feel like I didn't achieve the things I wanted to achieve. And I don't really know what my next steps are goal wise. Like I don't really know where I want to go, but I see these other people that I kind of want to copy. And so you're kind of struggling without a goal, what your goals are. Right. So you're kind of like, so there's like this, when we talk about like doing the work and working on yourself and all this stuff, like you you have to chase what you're interested in, but that only gets you so far. And if you actually have a goal in mind that aligns with that, that's going to help you achieve greatness. You're only going to achieve so much if you're just constantly chasing what interests you. You're going to have like shiny object syndrome, right? Um, but you can, I think at this stage of life with young kids, it's kind of like you kind of wake up and you're like, oh shoot, where did I want to be when I was this age? And I feel like I'm kind of behind the eight ball now. And like, what do I want to do? And that's kind of hard. I mean, for me, it's kind of like you see, you kind of have enough knowledge and exposure to like the pros and cons that it takes and the work that it takes to achieve some things. So you're kind of like, yeah, I see. I'm not naive enough to be like, I'm just going to go out there and start this big business, because you're naive and you don't see all the downfalls. You're like, yeah, I've seen some guys that have really effed that up. Like they really sacrifice their family on the altar of that business. And I don't want to do that, but I kind of want to have ambitious goals. Like, it's like, and maybe this isn't resonating with you, Kaylin. I don't know, but it's like,
I mean, I don't know. I don't necessarily have that feeling of
oh
um
shoot, I put myself out there. And there was no. You're like, dude,
but
no, you're way off the reservation on that one.
I know. I think that's real though, man. I mean, sometimes, I mean, we all have different things. I mean, I can talk about things that you probably wouldn't struggle with, and
We're
um,
editing all that out then. I'm just totally kidding.
no, man. I think that I would have guessed that a lot of people do feel that way. I definitely. Like I said, I mean, I have the feeling of being jealous of some people that have more success than I do. I don't know. And it may be, to be honest, that you've been more consistent about prioritizing your family. I mean, I had a period of time where I was working every night. I had my day job and I was working every night, and we had a toddler, and my wife hated me for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And would I advise somebody to do that, to have a day job and then have a side hustle for 2 hours every night with a wife and two kids, one of whom is an infant? No, that doesn't sound like a smart thing to do. And it may be that maybe I did have periods of sacrificing the family more than you. And then so maybe that's part of why I don't have that sense. Like maybe if you were real consistent the whole time and you never overdid it on work, maybe there could be some regrets there, something like that. But yeah, I definitely feel jealousy, and I'm learning to be more honest with myself about it, like about when I feel that way, and I was hanging out with a buddy who got a new house recently, and it's one of the most beautiful houses I've ever seen. And I was a little bit jealous. I had to be honest with
Mm-hmm.
myself. And it's like, if I wanted to try to afford a place that was a little nicer, could I? Well, probably. But I also like living above, below my means, or what is it? Above, below my means. I like having
Mm-hmm.
uh, simplicity there and things like that. Like in Austin, like if you want to live on the lake here in Austin, a lot of people do that, and there's some really nice places on the lake, and we're not on the lake. We're in another area. We really love the neighborhood that we're in, but there's just a million things that you can be jealous of, whether it's where somebody lives, what, how fit they are, what, how many kids they have, like, and then where your kid, how your kids are doing in X, Y, and Z, and
Mm.
money, and da, da, da. There's just, I think we all struggle with that, some flavor of it, and everybody's a little bit unique in their struggle. I, I
Yeah.
I feel bad that
I'm
I
totally,
did.
I'm just razzing you, man. I don't care.
Okay.
Um, I mean, I do care, but
I
it's
do care, but I don't care.
I guess where I come at it with is like, what are the tactics then for embracing because I think at the end of the day, you can take two extremes. One, you can justify your complacency by looking at all the negatives that resulted from someone's success, right? Or you can take the other extreme of like totally going gung ho and like sacrificing your family and saying, I'm gonna go all in on this because I want to be a success and all this. So it's like both are bad. But how do you balance that? Because I think it's easier to just be complacent and say, justify why you weren't as successful as them when maybe you weren't working hard enough, right? And so it's kind of like there is something to be said for not living up to your full potential. And I think that's kind of a little bit what is rooted in what I'm kind of going through is like, you're like, oh, could I have done that more? Could I put in more effort and like achieve that? And that's kind of what you're saying with your whole, ConvertKit competitor. It was kind of like, well, should I have done something different, or was I not working hard enough, or whatever? Like, you're kind of second guessing yourself. And how do you shift that to a mentality of like, okay, I'm just going to try to get better every day. And get better every day doesn't mean I'm going to put in one more hour every day, because I know that's going to come at the expense of something else. But it's like, how do I do things like, how do I, sleep better, or work out more so I feel better, so I'm more engaged with my kids? Or how do I simplify my life, live below my means so I don't have more stuff that's like taking a mental toll or whatever.
Yeah.
And how do you surround yourself with people that are like that? Because I think kind of what you're saying with curating your feed, that's really important, because if you're surrounding yourself with successful people that are always posturing to display their success, that's not healthy. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's like, how do you surround yourself with people that are, growth minded, but maybe are just like one step ahead of you,
Yeah.
or maybe they're one step behind you. So you're actually like helping them too. It's like, I think there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, there's so much that you said there, that I connect to. I think that, like, for me, there's definitely ways that I look back and I go, well, I could have worked harder. I could have been more focused. I do like to do a variety of different things, and that can be a strength, could also be a weakness. Gary Vee, I think about, also does a lot of different things. He has his holding company, his wine brand, his agency, his e-commerce agency, his sports agency, and yet he does find ways to make it work. And there's other people, Jeff Bezos, right? Hyper focused on Amazon, and just
He's
single
divorced though,
minded.
right? Like, he's divorced. Is
There
that
you
right?
go.
Yeah. Okay.
Horrible person. Horrible
Just
person.
for the record.
Yeah, just for the record. And so, like, yeah, like there's that balance is something I've struggled with. I also, like, going back a year or so, I was really not inspired at all by the work I was doing. And I was not coding, I was not iterating on the product, I wasn't improving it. I was maintaining things and was doing fine financially, but I was real disconnected, and I've kind of have reconnected with that, and I have a nice bit more balanced thing now where I'm feeling more inspired than I was in the past, and I'm seeing momentum moving in the right direction. For a while, my revenue was going down. My revenue
Mm.
went down by about half. And I was like, man, I need to fix this. Um, and I am feeling better about it, but I'm also doing stuff like this where we just talk for an hour and a half about being a dad and stuff like that, because
Mm.
is this directly related to my business? No, but it's something that it's a real curiosity for me. It's something that I'll walk away from this conversation fired up, and it's something that I'm learning. Like, I realize for me, when I'm doing content, if I'm going to talk to somebody and do a podcast or whatever, non-podcast, any kind of a call, if I'm going to spend time with somebody, I want to be learning something. And it could be learning, there could be a lot of different things I could potentially be learning, but if I'm like, I've had podcasts in the past where it made sense for my audience. The topic made sense. It was logical, but I had zero interest in it. I had zero curiosity. And that's one of the things I'm really trying to optimize for, to really be genuinely curious in everything I'm doing.
Sorry, I had to text my wife because we're nearing the end of our time slot.
Yeah, we are. We
I
are.
figured
We
in
are at the
full
end of
transparency as dads, I wanted
it.
to voice that.
We are nearing the end of the slot here,
Yeah.
and why don't I give you the final word, and then we'll give you can let people know where to find you online.
Awesome. So I have to do the final word? You say you're doing the
Yeah,
final
you
word?
no no you're doing let any I'll do the
I
final
wanted to
word.
say I want to do this again. I think we should do like a regular
I
collaboration
think so
for the
too.
Tucson Dad podcast. So I
Yeah.
think we only scratched the surface, man. There's an iceberg of knowledge waiting. Um, the final word would be, I think, this there was a very meta thing that happened when we were talking about like surrounding yourself with people and talking through issues and learning. in this podcast was like, really, I'm fired up. And I think there's something to be said for constantly embracing that balance, or the spectrum that is parenting, the spectrum that is like business, because there's always going to be, trade-offs. And it's like always assessing those, but then having a growth mindset. And I think that that's something I'm learning every day. I'm not an expert at, but it's I'll share one thing. It was funny because that's one thing with my podcast that I started as a passion project. So then I didn't really care about its success. I'm like, I'm not trying to monetize this. This isn't a side hustle. But that kind of made complacency creep in, and it's like mediocrity kind of crept in. And it's like, no, this is still really important to me. I still want to invest my time into it, and I need to make this the best I can be, and I don't want that to be an excuse for my laziness, right? Like the fact that it's just a passion project.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important. But so you can find me at TucsonDad.com, number 2centdad.com. I'm at Sudyk on Twitter. It's at SUDYK. But yeah, just subscribe to the podcast. I'm excited to do this again, Kalen. But thanks
Yeah,
for
man.
thanks for
Same here.
thanks for chatting, man.
I have about 6 or 7 like subtopics now that I have in mind to talk about. So I appreciate it, man.
Yes.
Had a blast, and we'll definitely talk again soon. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you very